agus madan va hula dunya, agus falcha orif arash. Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome back to the Plurilingual Lab speaker sessions. Is misha palmia kan shiblo, she gela hanam, is ruga is hoke mi on glasuko alaba, she neer ransachi hanam, agus is ma ur konjuchug. So I introduced myself in my now endangered language, Gaelic or Scottish Gaelic. My name is Palmigan Chiblo. I'm a Scottish Gael born and raised in Glasgow, Scotland, as you might be able to hear from the accent. And I am a PhD candidate in educational studies in the Department of Integrated Studies in Education. And I am your host today for the Plurilingual Lab speaker sessions. It is such an honor to be hosting you and to be speaking to you all today. Now, before I begin to introduce our wonderful panel speakers today, for which I'm sure we're all very excited, I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I am speaking to you today from Toronto, Canada. I would like to acknowledge this land, the plants, water, animals, and spirits, and our responsibilities to them. For thousands of years, Toronto has been the traditional land and territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And today is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous languages of Turtle Island, or what is now known as North America. Indigenous languages are inseparable from the land and are still spoken to this day in Canada and worldwide. It is important to acknowledge our everyday collective responsibilities in ensuring Indigenous languages and knowledges are equally validated and respected alongside colonial languages in language education and beyond. Miigwech agus tapaleif. So just some Zoom etiquette, please. During the talk, please keep your video and sound off. You can, of course, react using the thumbs up and clapping feature. And just to let you know that this talk will be recorded and available in the Plurilingual Lab YouTube channel, so you can all watch that afterwards. After the talk, there'll be 30 minutes for a discussion period. You can post your questions in the chat, or you can unmute your microphone at that point to ask a question. The discussion will be moderated by Ben Kalman and will not be recorded. Now, each presentation that we have today will be about 5 minutes as well, but I'll touch on that on a second as well. And if you have any questions, please do place them in the chat and we'll address them at the end. So without further ado, it is my great honor to introduce to you our wonderful panel today. This panel has 11 short talks of authors who contributed articles to the special issue of the TESL Canada Journal, and that will be published sometime this year. The name of the issue is Plurilingualism and Translanguaging, Pedagogical Approaches for Empowerment and Validation. And the guest editors of this special issue are Payant and Angelica Galante. Now, each presentation will be 5 minutes and should last around about 1 hour, and participants will have 30 minutes for discussion, as I pointed out before. Aisha Barise will chair the panel and will remind the panel participants if there is at any time when the time is running up as well, just to make you all aware. So thank you all so much again. We're incredibly excited. Thank you very much for being here, everyone. And I hope you very enjoy this talk today with our wonderful panel. So over to you, Aisha, and I very much look forward to listening to the panel and the speakers. Thank you very much. More in time.
Thank you very much, Paul. And we will get started with the first talk with Caroline Payette and Dr. Angelica Galante.
Hello, yes, thank you. I'm Caroline, and this is Angelica. So the title of our talk is the title of the special issue, so Plurilingualism and Translanguaging, Pedagogical Approaches for Empowerment and Validation, an introduction. Before we go ahead and get started, we want to really acknowledge all of the efforts, all of the hard work by the journal editors. So we have Antonella, Valeo, and Fernandez Fez, who really helped us throughout, as well as Nusha Pavia, who has been wonderful throughout the process, and of course, all the reviewers and the authors, and now you as future readers of the special issue. So thank you very much. I'll go ahead and just get started with what really motivated the need or the interest with this special issue. So we know that with the plurilingual turn in language education, there is an urgent call for pedagogical approaches that are linguistically and culturally inclusive. This turn that we are living in challenges these hegemonic and monolingual ideologies that really not only marginalize certain people, but they really, what troubles me is that they continue to inform so many of the SLA theories, and that continues then to permeate language education practices. So we have to break this cycle, which I think is really wonderful that we are doing. So we really do not want to continue endorsing uncritical practices in the classrooms, because these will have detrimental effects on our students, on their identities, on their language use, and just overall language development. So we were, of course, we all enjoy reading various perspectives, and really the two most prominent theories or pedagogies that align with the plurilingual turn and that have very much direct applications for language teaching is plurilingualism and translanguaging. I'm trying to go so fast and I'm actually stumbling. So from these approaches, what really stands out and motivated this special issue is this idea that, you know, these theories can be vehicles for empowerment. They can be spaces for individuals to negotiate and validate who they are, who they want to become, and really, I think these two themes are really the hope for the future for our students in the language classroom. So Angelica, it will be your turn.
Excellent. Thank you, Carolyn. Well, as Carolyn said, both plurilingualism and translanguaging have many points of convergence. They both have a problem-posing stance that challenge context-specific forms of linguistic and cultural discrimination and oppression. They value the notion of the repertoire, where learners can draw from their knowledge of languages, cultures, and semiotic resources to make meaning and to learn. They both reject prescribed sets of pedagogical practices and make learning personal and meaningful. They also challenge current societal inequalities, and they highlight multiple realities. Next slide, please. So our aim with this special issue was to bring these two approaches together because they both reject monolingual and binary thinking about language and pedagogy. But we as editors also reject monocentric views of theories. So we were concerned with the intellectual satisfaction or security that knowledge and research will inform socially just practices. We do not believe in one theoretical, in theoretical superiority, that one theory is better than the other. And we also acknowledge that both can be used depending on the context, geographical location, and other reasons. So more importantly, we invite all of you, educators and researchers, to examine colonial and neoliberal forces that can marginalize plurilingual learners, prioritize bottom-up practice among learners as social agents, and facilitate instruction to potentially shift dynamics of privilege. Next slide, please. So finally, we invite you all to explorar these two pedagogies in different contexts of our special issue. The articles focus on empoderamento, where a shift of power dynamics make teachers work with students and not for students, by encouraging them to take the floor and aproveitar all the affordances of their repertoire. And we'd like now to invite Li Chen and her co-authors to present the next contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. So let me just go ahead with sharing my screen. Hey, does it work okay?
Yes.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Le, and I am a postdoc at University of Toronto. And I'm very excited to present our research paper today on behalf of my co-authors, Michael Karras, Reza, and Enrica Picardo. The title of our article is From Promising Controversies to Negotiated Practices, and it's a research synthesis of plurilingual pedagogy in global contexts. As you can see from the title, the content of our article focuses on empirical research literature related to pedagogical approaches inspired by plurilingualism. And I'd also like to acknowledge that this research is supported by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. In recent years, there has been much positive development in plurilingualism. However, how plurilingualism is translated into classroom instructional practices varies greatly across contexts. Despite these meaningful efforts to connect theory with practice, there have been no systematic investigations conducted so far to offer a synopsis of the empirical value of plurilingual pedagogy. So our research team aims to address this knowledge gap and better understand the factors that facilitate or impede the translation of plurilingualism theory into meaningful practices in different educational contexts. We addressed two questions in our paper. First, how is plurilingual pedagogy being enacted in teaching and learning practices in classroom settings? And second, what are the benefits and the challenges of plurilingual pedagogy as perceived by educators and students across the globe? To answer these questions, our article presents 30 empirical studies on plurilingual pedagogy as enacted and experienced by educators and learners in various global K-12 as well as post-secondary context. To respond to the first question, we present findings from 4 aspects: the definitions of plurilingual pedagogy, the implementation of plurilingual pedagogy through various tasks and activities, the educational sector where plurilingual pedagogy has been implemented, and the geographical locations of plurilingual initiatives. And to answer our second question, we discuss the major benefits and the challenges of plurilingual pedagogy from student and educator perspectives. Just as a snapshot, our results suggest that the primary benefits of plurilingual pedagogy can be viewed in terms of 4 aspects. That is, students' development of plurilingual and pluricultural competence, evolution of language beliefs towards a more positive orientation to plurality and hybridity, and then the affirmation of student and teacher identity and the promotion of their agency, and the last and not least, the language and literacy development. The perceived challenges, however, are related to the nature and the practical issues of designing and implementing plurilingual instruction in the classroom, which are often interconnected with institutional policies as well as ideological discourses. Based on our findings, we argue that plurilingual pedagogy has manifested itself as an emergent, evolving, and expansive approach with several interconnected key tenets. The first, plurilingual pedagogy has been enacted as a boundary crossing approach, and it is growing as an action-oriented approach that resists imposed monolingual discourses and co-constructs meanings and communications from the bottom up. And plurilingual pedagogy keeps the learner, especially who the learner is, at its core. Furthermore, plurilingual pedagogy should be considered as a long-term developmental and individualized approach. And we call into question the appropriateness of assessment instruments being used. And finally, the negotiated and entangled nature of plurilingual pedagogy has become even more prominent in the findings regarding the challenges. Yet all these in turn reveal plurilingual pedagogy's great potential to disturb, co-construct, and reconfigure schooling. And given the time, that's all for now. Thank you very much. And I will just stop share. If you have any questions, I have my email contact on the slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lei, for the talk. And now I'll invite John Wayne de la Cruz to present next.
All right. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I forgot I'm all muted and my video is not there. Nice to see you all today. I'm joining you from Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, which is the traditional and unceded lands of the Ganyangahaga people. And today I'll be sharing with you a little bit about my article in this upcoming issue, which I called, I subtitled myself, Affordances and Challenges of Canadian English as an Additional Language Students, Plurilingual Learning Strategies in a Francophone College. So overall, as Lei already mentioned, I too draw from plurilingualism as a theoretical and pedagogical framework. And my main angle coming into this study is to look into how students already perhaps do or engage in plurilingual strategies and what they think of it. Because most of the time it's easy for us as researchers or even as teachers, because I was teaching ESL at one point, to come and say, okay, this is a good thing to do in the classroom. My students should be doing this. But most of the time we exclude their voices and their thoughts and their experiences when we conceptualize how to implement plurilingual learning strategies. And aside from some policy challenges, implementation is a really big challenge. And so I thought looking at what students already do and think can help us really address this gap in the implementation of plurilingual pedagogies. And so my main questions here really is to look at, again, I looked at English as additional language tutors and tutees in a college here in Montreal. So instead of a typical student-teacher interaction, I was looking at peer tutors and tutees. They're all EAL students, but one is the one who's acting as a tutor, one who has stronger language skills, and tutees are usually the ones who have just begun, say, an Anglo de Base course in the college, or Cégep as they're called here in Montreal. And I wanted to look at how they engage in plurilingual strategies and for what reasons, especially because these students were not taught to engage in plurilingual strategies in the tutoring context. So they have never really had training in it before, nor have received any experience being taught plurilingually. And also, I was curious to know what kinds of affordances or challenges they think these strategies afford them or present them. But I also observed them over the course of a semester to kind of complement what they will say based on what I've seen. So a few takeaways in terms of results. Overall, I've noticed three most dominant plurilingual strategies that these EL tutors and tutees engage with, particularly translanguaging for meaning making, translation for mediation, as well as cross-linguistic comparisons. And most of these were used to support their overall comprehension in oral English, which is not surprising because of the oral nature of the tutoring center. But when I was speaking with my participants, many of them have really kind of keyed down into this idea that, at least in the tutoring center, they really want to, mix their languages, switch across them, compare language items across their known languages in order to support each other's comprehension, particularly because many of the tutees would come from their EL classrooms into the tutoring center and say, okay, I just had this English class and I didn't understand a thing. And so for the tutors, they really found themselves as like their role, they saw their role as, okay, how do we bridge that comprehension gap, among other affordances. And so for that, you'll hopefully you'll read the rest of the article. But a main key challenge that they said they encounter whenever they think of engaging with plurilingual strategies is the kind of the persisting monolingual postures of their current and their previous EAL classes. And so even though they're a bit more free in terms of engaging with plurilingual strategies in the tutoring center, I asked them if they do that too in the classroom. Most of them said no, particularly because their teachers had this sort of target language only monolingual policy, whether de facto or officially. A lot of them were worried of being docked marks and things like that. And so they're not even sometimes able to, say, pose questions to their English teachers in the classroom in a language other than English. And so this really keeps them from truly participating sometimes in their classroom tasks and whatnot. So in terms of that, for me, the biggest pedagogical implication that I would share is that I think we could, as teachers and researchers, we could start looking at the ways and the reasons for which these additional language learners already engage in plurilingual strategies. So while it might be an emergent concept or framework or theory or whatever we want to call it in the literature, it is not new for many language speakers, particularly for multilingual language speakers. And if we just look at what they already do and try our best to incorporate those more explicitly in our classroom practice, such as explicitly encouraging them to translanguage or translate in classroom tasks, or even as teachers show that we can plurilanguage in classroom management. Okay, sorry. And this could be really validating and empowering. So thanks again. And my email is down there below. And I also want to thank the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada for supporting this research. Thanks, Aisha.
Thank you so much, John. And now we'll welcome Amir Khalan for the next talk.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Amir Khalan. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Education at McGill University. I'm delighted to be in conversation with the authors of this important TESL Canada issue, and also with the audience who have kindly attended today's event. The title of my article is Negotiating Writing Identities Across Languages. Drawing on findings from an ethnographic study of 3 multilingual writers' writing practices, my article focuses on the translingual practices that these writers engaged with and discusses how these practices enrich the writers' writing processes and products. In my article, I explain how these writers' translanguaging was a complex process with 5 dimensions. 1, lexical translanguaging. 2, syntactic translanguaging. 3, rhetorical translanguaging. 4, conceptual translanguaging. And 5, presentational translanguaging, or how to disseminate text across cultures, and also how to navigate assessment dynamics in different educational settings. In my article, I use the term translanguaging to highlight any convergence or interaction between the languages of a speaker's linguistic and cultural repertoire that can help writers sustain the writing identity while they write across languages. So I'm interested in translanguaging because it helps with sustaining writing identities. That is why, next to grammatical and lexical translanguaging, I'm also interested in intercultural rhetoric, the concepts and discourses that writers transfer from one language to another, and how writers make sense of publishing and dissemination dynamics as they migrate across cultures, and also how they make sense of assessment and evaluation strategies in educational settings in new cultures. Writing identity is what writers conceive themselves to be. It is the perception of their writing skills, strengths, and abilities. Writing identity is writers' beliefs and preferences for the content and discourses that they see worthy of framing in writing. When writing in additional languages, writers make use of translanguaging because it creates familiar semiotic ground for them to see their writing identities as relevant to the task. Based on this perception, translanguaging helps create a sense of continuity when learners think about their writing identities. Thanks to translanguaging, writers can use some of the linguistic features that are used to across languages. They can, for instance, use cognates or make use of grammatical features that are common among the languages that they know. But additionally, they can engage with intercultural rhetoric, use the native rhetorical practices while writing in adopted languages. And also they can rewrite the discourses that they have developed over years in the mother tongues in a new language. A move away from viewing translanguaging as L1 lexical and syntactic interference to appreciating rhetorical, conceptual, and presentational translanguaging helps us see the power relational dimensions of writing pedagogies of translanguaging. A complex interpretation of translanguaging can reveal the power imbalances between minoritized students and the teachers. Embracing translanguaging in all its complexity can reveal to teachers that when they're evaluating their students' writings. They are in fact judging the cultural, ideological, discursive, and rhetorical existence, although at the surface they seem to be assessing their use of English. It seems much less problematic to tell a student that the grammar is wrong than criticize a student's conceptual understanding of the world. Through the lens that I offer in my article, we can see that when we engage with the former, we typically engage with the latter as well. Understanding this dynamic will help teachers to put themselves in a democratic relationship with the students in an attempt not to only teach the students, but to learn from their perspectives, beliefs, and discourses. Such a move will facilitate teachers and students' resistance against centralized curricula. A pedagogy of translanguaging in writing will provide the teachers with the confidence that is needed to challenge received curricula by moving towards rhetorical and discursive fusions. These are some of the major themes that I highlight in my article. I invite you to read my article when the issue is released. And I would like to end my brief presentation by thanking Dr. Payant and Dr. Galante for leading this very important project. Thank you all.
Great, thank you very much, Amir Khalan. And now we invite Sylvia next.
Here I am. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you, Anna, for giving us the opportunity to present our work on, oh, no, it's not changing, okay, on the use of linguistic landscapes to promote plurilingualism and to promote plurilingualism for all. And we are presenting a multi-method and multi-site study in Germany and in the Netherlands. I will be presenting with Lisa because Joanna could not attend this conference today. So we are using linguistic landscapes understood as the languages and all kinds of semiotic resources around us in the daily life to enhance critical language awareness. And the research question that lead our paper in this special issue is to what extent can the use of linguistic landscapes as pedagogical resources in the language classroom foster critical language awareness about underlying power relations and tensions between languages in multilingual areas? And just to give you a very brief standpoint on the theoretical background, we noticed that in the literature on linguistic landscapes and the use of linguistic landscapes in the school settings, there were multiple tendencies, some focusing or having a multilingual focus and analyzing the languages in the public spheres, in the public spaces, others looking for the ethno-linguistic vitality of some languages. And some of this research were learning in the linguistic landscapes, meaning in situation of immersion, and other studies were approaching linguistic landscapes as didactic resources, as pedagogical resources for the learning about languages or about target language. In Hamburg, we decided to explore the multilingualism in the linguistic landscapes through the pedagogical and didactic use of linguistic landscapes. It's this blue circle you see here. And in Groningen, Joanna collected data in the other settings marked in red. So it's not a binary way of thinking about using linguistic landscapes, but rather the interception of different tendencies that we are and were interested in. Just to give you one idea where we are situated, we try to point towards Europe, and you can see Leeuwarden and Groningen and also Hamburg in this map. It is in the north of Europe, and we conducted teacher interviews, questionnaires, and very intensive classroom observations when the teachers and students were working around linguistic landscapes. We worked with 5 teachers in 5 classrooms, and this is the kind of material we had at our disposal to discuss with the kids in the classroom. This one is in Leeuwarden in Netherlands. So I will now to Lisa.
Yeah, our results show that the social, the power, and the performance dimensions of language awareness were met. And this applies both for the students and also for the teachers, as you can see in the right column. So next slide. We observed that there was an empowerment to use different languages. This is an example from the German side. And we see that the student did not only use other languages, but dropped languages such as the majority language German, and also English or French, which was the language of the classroom. And so we see here a willingness to use other languages and also to use translanguaging. And to wrap it up, our core results relate both to students and to teachers, and we see that students activated their plurilingual repertoires because they engaged in plurilingual practices, and this legitimized and made them share and reconstruct their plurilingual repertoires. By working with linguistic landscapes, students' awareness was raised, and especially about the power of language and the power of languages. And students engaged in reflection and also the deconstruction of banal monolingual ideologies and practices. And they found new ways to look at the constitution of languages in society. And finally, we found positive effects among the monolinguals and the plurilingual students. The teachers acknowledged the asset of using linguistic landscapes for reflection on multilingualism at a societal level and on plurilingualism at the more individual level, and also for the connection. Okay.
If you can just thank you.
The connection of outdoor and indoor learning, and finally about the performance in gaining higher language attitudes and the willingness to use other languages. So thank you, and we welcome you to learn more about the project.
Thank you very much, Lisa and Sylvia. And now we invite Monica, Shank, Lao, and Harini Raja Gopal. Excuse me for mispronouncing your name.
Good morning / good afternoon, everyone. I'm Monica Shanklawuo, and together with Harini and Catherine, today we'll be sharing our work exploring possibilities for bringing a plurilingual approach into pre-service teacher education with an orientation towards equity and anti-racism. In this study, we as teacher educators used critical action research to examine our own equity-oriented plurilingual practice across the 3 mandatory language and literacy courses for pre-service elementary teachers. As a team, we followed one cohort of pre-service teachers over their 11-month Bachelor of Education program to look at how they interacted with this plurilingual approach and what it meant for their evolving identities, beliefs about plurilingual pedagogical possibilities, and their teaching practices. We looked at pre-service teachers' coursework, analyzed our own teaching materials and field notes, and also did follow-up interviews with the pre-service teachers at the end of their program to explore their ongoing thinking and practice related to equity and linguistic diversity. Plurilingualism is the backbone of our theoretical approach and supported our focus on centering pre-service teachers' full linguistic repertoires and supporting them to do the same for their K-7 students across the curriculum. In addition to plurilingualism, we draw from what Van Leeuwen calls a mashup of theories. Translanguaging, a big part of all of our backgrounds, also deeply informed both our practice and analysis. Multiliteracy's perspectives also informed this work, and we see multiliteracies and plurilingualism as complementary frameworks that affirm learners' full communicative repertoires with an aim of destabilizing inequitable communicative hierarchies. Finally, we also draw from ratiolinguistics to critique ideologies that valorize linguistic practices in unequal ways based on speakers' racialized positioning in society. I'd now like to hand over to Harini. Thanks.
Thanks, Monica. As Monica said, we centered diverse ways of knowing and ways to disrupt monolingual ideologies. Our pre-service teachers created, for instance, language use profiles, multimodal pieces, engaged in activities drawing on all of their non-English languages, and consistently interacted with dual language texts. They also quite consistently reflected on how to teach diverse content using a multilingual lens. Slide, please. In this paper, we focus on two pre-service teachers, Marisol and Ava. For Marisol, a self-identified multilingual Chinese Canadian, our focus on plurilingualism, multiliteracies, and equity supported the development for her of a resource orientation towards her own languages and also towards her own racialized identity. And in a sense, this orientation enabled her to overcome what she termed a fear of literacy and to consider ways for her to moving towards her own goal of equitably being able to support minoritized learners. For Ava, self-identified as white and monolingual English speaker, this focus productively worked to unsettle her white English-speaking privilege and strengthened her commitment to towards her work in leveling inequitable power hierarchies within the classroom. Both Marisol and Ava experienced enormous shifts through the year in their imaginations of plurilingual possibilities, pedagogical possibilities. Yet they also struggled to translate their emerging plurilingual identities and beliefs into practice, offering some implications for all of us that Catherine will discuss next. Thank you.
Hi, so these cases, they kind of pointed to some key processes we thought for empowerment and validation, like normalizing difference, unsettling this internalized white supremacy and English supremacy, developing a sense of responsibility toward linguistic equity, and embodying these ideals in classroom practice. And so I'll just close with a few implications from our study about systemically supporting these processes for teacher candidates and those who teach and advise them, and those who recruit and then recommend them for certification. So in individual courses, for example, we think it might be key to increase the modeling of plurilingual pedagogies as a way of fostering a plurilingual lens, which we've heard about from some of our other panelists this morning. And that's opposite to our initial approach, which was to foster the mindset first as a foundation for later practice. And we think that efforts like that will be strongest if they're part of a collective effort across course sections, the middle circle there. And that means instruction that's anchored in coordinated explicit equity goals and things like intentional professional development and reflection as a team. And then finally, the third circle here, these processes have to take up space structurally, we know, not just pedagogically. And so at the program level, we're understanding the kinds of advocacy that we need to be engaging in and leading. And I think that that's about our time, but if K-12 or teacher education are spaces where you're also trying to work out a plurilingual equity agenda, please do check out our paper or hang around for the discussion time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Catherine, Monica, and Harini. And now we invite the next speakers, Quintin and Walkier.
Okay. So hello, my name is Quintin Stotts, and I'm very excited to speak to you today about our article titled Applying Complex Dynamic Systems Theory applying complex dynamic systems theory to identify dynamic properties of plurilingual repertoires on behalf of my co-author Vauci Cardoso. The theme of the special issue is empowerment and validation, and the study really sits quite comfortably with that validation piece, particularly in how we challenged the traditional notion of language repertoires, what many of the colleagues on this panel would know as the traditional linear model, which compartmentalizes languages as these discrete entities that can be fully acquired and that sit separately in our minds. So in this regard, we wish to promote a more dynamic conceptualization of language repertoires. And to do this, we explored the language repertoire through two theoretical frameworks. The first being complex dynamic systems theory, which posits that languages are interconnected systems that change constantly, that are open to their environments, and that importantly undergo internal dynamics that affect their evolution as interconnected subsystems that together form a larger system that on a certain scale we begin to call the repertoire. In this way, complex dynamic systems theory has a lot in common with plurilingualism and the research behind it that supports it. particularly in how language repertoires are viewed as fluid, uneven, interconnected, and how language competence is this uneven flux of functionality within languages and across activities. So considering these two ideas, we began to ask the question, are plurilingual repertoires therefore dynamic systems as defined by CDSD? Of course, it seems natural to make this connection and call language repertoires dynamic systems, but according to CDSD, we should be careful not to use the words dynamic and complex superficially or take them for granted, because CDSD has been conceptually established in applied linguistics, and we still need to build the body of evidence to confirm its place within the field and to perhaps bring out its full potential, which is quite great. So this study examines whether plurilingual repertoires are complex systems using a CDSD methodology. And in doing so, it also examines CDSD's applicability to the study of repertoires. Can we use CDSD to study the natures of plurilingualism? So our research question asked whether the 5 CDSD constructs that are listed at the bottom of this slide manifest in how plurilinguals perceive their language development over time. Interestingly, our method used no treatment. Our participants were from across the world. There was 3 of them, and they were daily users of multiple languages and learning an additional one. And we let them develop their new languages according to whatever situation or context they happened to be in over a 3-month period. We organized a series of interviews and questionnaires. And then after the observation window was finished, we tried to reconstruct how their language systems developed from a systems dynamic by working backwards through the data using an approach called retrodictive qualitative modeling. So as for results, we were able to identify 4 dynamics of complex dynamic systems theory within the repertoires of our participants as their repertoires changed and even just existed over time. Notably, we found that language systems vary according to the state of development, fitness to context, and importantly, to the array of coexisting systems already in the minds of our participants. This seems to correspond to CDSD's idea of co-adaptation. We found that developmental jumps impact behavior and skills in other languages as well, and this speaks to phase shifts and co-adaptation. And we did find that language systems can reach critical tipping points in which they begin to develop a capacity to feed their own development, which is like a feedback loop within an environment without direct influence either from external forces. And this speaks to self-organization, a key CDSD construct, and perhaps emergence, depending on how you'd like to conceive emergence. So implicationally, this study really speaks to the fact that plurilingual repertoires are dynamic systems, and that researchers can maybe uncover the natures of plurilingualism by adopting a CDSD methodology that focuses on the individual and the agency of the individual as well. This study acts as a reminder that CDSD's application to plurilingualism is very promising and nascent. And we're very happy to have contributed to the bridging of CDSD and plurilingualism with this special issue. And so I don't want to take up too much time, so thank you guys so much for your time and attention. And if you have any questions, my email is just at the bottom of the slide. Thank you.
Great talk. Thank you very much, Quintin. And in the following talk is Josh Parra.
Okay. Well, that should do. Thank you very much to the wonderful guest editors for what they've done over the last few months. They've been spot on, and it's been a pleasure to work with them and to see what everybody's doing or has done for this special issue. I'm Josh Parra, and I'm going to be talking about or describing an in the classroom piece, which is a very pedagogical, descriptive kind of a format, publication format at the journal. So you'll see no data, no method. It's all how to do it in the classroom. Let me move forward. Okay, so today I'm going to be at the intersection of heritage language education, empowerment, and translanguaging. I'm a heritage language educator. I work with students who have been minoritized, language minoritized and racialized, and whose linguistic repertoires are typically problematized and stigmatized in mainstream language education. In this case, I'm going to be looking at empowerment as an objective and how to promote it and how to reach it through translanguaging, which is one of the theories or the main theory through which I work. So at the core of it all is what I'm going to be talking about today, which is framed as digital storytelling. The rationale is, such as said, well, I believe we need linguistically and culturally sustaining pedagogies that empower students whose multilingualism has been racialized and whose communities have been language minoritized in mainstream education. I live in Indianapolis. I'm in the United States, even though right now I'm in North Africa, in the city of Melilla. I work at a large urban university, and this comes, everything I'm going to be describing today, comes from a composition intensive course, which is specifically designed for so-called heritage speakers. For those of you who might not be aware of who a heritage speaker is, there are students labeled as such as heritage speakers are typically bilingual and multilingual individuals who have acquired a minority language at home or in the community, which is a heritage language, and then a socially and politically dominant one at school and in society, with the home languages or home language receiving little or no educational support in mainstream education. So there's huge parasymmetry here. And the discourse I'm using right now is not developed through a repertoires kind of narrative, because this is how heritage speakers are conceptualized in the broader literature. Now, moving towards equity in education of racialized and language minoritized multilingual students, I believe that educators must gain the necessary perspectives and skills to shift from classroom spaces that oppress and divide to classroom spaces that empower and uplift. Now, why uplift? Because of the histories of linguistic shaming, stigmatization, problematization, the monolingual ideologies that populate our classrooms and inform what we do, what teachers do, and to build spaces for empowerment and validation, as this special issue celebrates and seeks to better understand. Now, in this paper, I present one example of a pedagogy grounded in my own students' experiences, the people I work with and I'm committed to, and our contextual realities, and describe it in some kind of detail for you. Now, I align key objectives in Spanish as a heritage language education in the sociolinguistic, pedagogical, and ideological matrix afforded by translanguaging pedagogies with a sharp focus on empowerment and validation. Heritage language education, very, very superficially, focuses on the development of multiliteracies, critical language awareness, promotes positive identity work, bridges the community, rethinks the classroom community boundaries, and is informed very heavily by sociolinguistics. I'm describing the kind of heritage language education we do for this, called best practices type of an approach. Now, translanguaging, I'm not going to go very deep into it, but for me, I want to emphasize that translanguaging reconceptualizes language not only as multilingual, but also as multisemiotic, multisensory, multimodal resource for sense and meaning making. It bridges and considers the human capacity to engage with and draw on both multiple linguistic and non-linguistic resources dynamically, and it goes beyond just language as a compartment. It positions language in dialogue with other broader sociocognitive aspects for meaning and sense making. Now, empowerment, it's an intentional ongoing process centered in the local community. It allows to gain greater access to and control over those resources that are often taken away from people. And empowerment theory often describes or is how changes and beliefs and attitudes contribute to participation in social change.
Josh,
now,
if you can wrap up a little bit, we're running out of time there.
Yeah. So let me move on to the part of digital storytelling, which I have, my students had created 4-minute digital stories over a 6-week period. They also developed 3 written documents with no target language, and everything ended in a viewing session with parents and everybody else who wanted to attend. Now, the timeline, which you can access in the publication, is very well described, I believe. It has many details which you can follow. It started with some introduction about what digital storytelling is. Then we talked about multimodality, then on to writing different types of drafts, editing, getting together, giving each other feedback. And then by week 5, they had arrived at a final product, which we then in week 6 viewed all together in this special event that we held. Again, all of this is described in detail. Now, 3 considerations for anybody who's interested in this. Meaning making and sense making is not monolingual, it's certainly not linguistic only. Students reflected on the positive affordances characterizing multimodality and transsemiotic flows at work in this kind of pedagogy. And when working with students who have been historically neglected, we must shift from what students can't do with written words so that we can facilitate them into mainstream literacies to create spaces where the repertoires can be critically and creatively articulated through new literacy practices. Thank you very much. And yeah, look forward to the discussion.
Great talk. Thank you very much, Josh. And next we have Dulaney.
So this is my presentation for today. Okay. Right, so it is a perspective paper and with the title Plurilingualism in a Constructively Aligned and Decolonized TESL Curriculum. I am Dulaney Swaravira. In this article, I primarily do three things. First, I go over the arguments put forward by critical language scholars, suggesting the fact that exclusion, devaluation, and marginalization continue in the fields of English language learning and teaching. This is because these fields are largely dominated by various exclusionary mechanisms like the ones I have shown here, which can be linked to settler colonial, neocolonial, and imperialist ideology. I recap the fact that this is a global phenomenon, which is not only limited to settled nations. What I tried to do here was to convince the reader that there is a need to change the hegemonic status quo. I focus on TESL programs as they are important pedagogical spaces that can influence how future English language teachers perceive and act on these exclusionary mechanisms. In this backdrop, I argue the fact that it is important to decolonize TESL curricula by deepening the pre-service English language or EL teachers' knowledge in critical and transformative pedagogies while developing their critical consciousness. And secondly, and most importantly, I launched my discussion on plurilingual approaches, asserting that they can be considered as critical and transformative pedagogies. This is how my article relates to the topic of the special issue. In the bulk of my article, using the works of plurilingual and translanguaging scholars, I tried to show that plurilingual pedagogies are effective decolonizing tools that empower and validate learners. I explored how these alternative but empowering teaching methods help EL learners question, analyze, and resist systems of oppression. So these methods can also be viewed as socially just, anti-racist, and transformative pedagogies. Drawing on empirical research, I discuss how these methods validate and appreciate multiple perspectives and differences. Thirdly, I tried to remedy the gap created by curriculum design challenges and political resistance to successfully implement these approaches in education. For instance, we all know how great this method is, but how does the plurilingual approach look like in a decolonized TESL curriculum? So I came up with this curriculum model. At this point, I want to mention what Tuck and Yang 2012 mentioned about curriculum designing. They say that in settler context, curriculum objectives should focus on improving the students' knowledge about indigenous lands and freedoms and disturbing narratives of settler dominance. And they also caution against using the idea of decolonization metaphorically. Therefore, the intended learning outcomes I came up with call for pre-service learners or teachers to be able to identify, apply, and design plurilingual teaching techniques and develop their critical consciousness about indigenous and anti-imperialist struggles. Plurilingual learning and assessment tasks are aligned with these learning outcomes. But I do not go into the details of step-by-step classroom implementation in my article. Then Lin 2012 mentioned that without directly using Western theories, there is a possibility of adjusting them to suit the specific context. So when creating decolonized TESL curriculum with plurilingual approaches, I borrowed and adapted ideas presented by Indigenous, non-Western, and Western scholars. And I invite all of you to read my article once it's published. Thank you very much for taking the time to be here and to listen to my presentation or the speech. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, Dulaney. And next, I invite Saskia and Sunny to present.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Sasuke Van Vegan from York University, and together with Sunny Lau from Bishop's University, we are pleased to share our contribution to the special issue. Thank you, Angelica and Carolyn. Drawing on insights from our respective empirical work, our paper is a conceptual piece titled Becoming Critical Sociolinguists in TESL Through Translanguaging and Embodied Practice. To summarize the focus of our article, we reflect on both the theory of language we bring with us to the classroom, or ontology, and the ways in which we come to know and expand practices, epistemology, articulating a proposed methodology or ethic to guide teaching and learning. The article is explicitly political, asserting an activist agenda to actively challenge monolingual ideologies and linguistic hierarchies, recognizing networks of meaning distributed across linguistic and non-linguistic forms. Language and literacy, particularly print-based, had been privileged representational practices, raising the question of what is missing in understanding meaning and meaning-making from a merely humanist perspective. And as theoretical grounding for this proposition, we engage an expansive view of translanguaging theory. Drawing on emerging post-humanist and new materialist perspectives, we consider the entire sense-making repertoire and how human and non-human bodies, tools, objects, and spaces intersect. This is a broader and perhaps more encompassing theorization of translanguaging that is transsystemic to more fully reflect, mobilize, strengthen assemblages of meaning-making and repertoires of practice in a more than human world. And based on this understanding, we propose a translanguaging methodology in TESL and teacher education to engage educators and students in critical sociolinguistic inquiry and embodied practice. I'll turn it over to Sunny now to continue.
Next slide, please. Okay. So the translanguaging methodology in TESL and teacher education that we propose here aims to promote critical citizenship in ethical relations among all life, materials, and environments to bridge the traditional separation between human from non-human domains. We also aim to explore ways of being, doing, and knowing in reflexivity toward all forms of inequities, including our own privilege and complicity, and what ethical responsibility entails in the social, cultural, socio-political, and eco world. In our article, we include examples from classroom studies and teacher education research. Here is only a sample of them, so please read our article. We know that our concepts here may be a bit abstract, but with examples, you understand what we're trying to say. Next slide, please. In our article, we offer a heuristic model that synthesizes a translanguaging methodology that might be useful to inspire instructional planning and practice, not as a set of prescriptive teaching strategies or fixed understanding. The model comprises two layers. The outer layer is a set of squares encircled and encompassed by a continuous line that articulates the ontological dimensions or ways of being and thinking about the human and non-human world. Which underpin a translanguaging methodology, which addresses an ethical responsibility that accounts for the interdependence between the human and the non-human worlds, including reflexivity towards our own complicity and privilege, a radical hope toward new possible futures. It also underscores a process ontology that views knowledge as emergent, connected flows distributed across linguistic and non-linguistic forms, and emphasizes the process of becoming.
And turning now to the inner layer, That includes a set of circles elaborating epistemological dimensions or ways of enacting a translanguaging methodology, including classroom practices of critical inquiry into eco-social concerns and affective connections and feelings towards socio-scientific issues. Through these engagements, knowledge and understanding arises in transsystemic meaning-making across relational entanglements that include both encounters and sustained relations among the human and the more than human. And with this proposed methodology, we advocate for educators and their students to become inquirers of language together, expanding repertoires of practice, not just language teaching, by engaging as critical sociolinguists in their own right, adopting and enacting a translanguaging stance and embodied practice to identify and problematize how meanings arise and function, to promote, restrict, or render visible particular practices and values in eco-socio-political contexts. So thank you, and we
thank you.
look forward to engaging with you.
Great, thank you very much, Saskia and Sunny. And now for our final speakers, Rhea and Elka.
Hello, everyone. My name is Raya Werner, and my co-author is Elka Todeva. Our paper is titled Plurilingualism and Multimodality, the Metanoia Within Reach. And this paper is really grounded in our personal experiences as plurilinguals, as teachers and teacher educators. And between the two of us, we have experience from preschool through graduate school on all 6 continents. So I think it speaks to the scope of contexts where these approaches can be implemented. So we're drawing on these personal experiences and the need that we see to respond to teachers' concerns about adopting a plurilingual pedagogy. In the research, there's a lot of hesitancy towards these approaches that teachers express, although as we've seen today, there's been so much progress and innovation in this area as well. And so we think that one thing we need to do is foster more egalitarian relationships between teachers, students, teacher educators, researchers, etc. And so in order to accomplish this, we call for a metanoia, which is a Greek word that refers to a transformative shift of mind. And we propose the metanoia towards a more expansive way of thinking about communication and learning and incorporating plurilingualism and multimodality side by side through co-exploration of communicative repertoires. And so in our paper, we draw on complex dynamic systems theory, Hawkins' I, thou, it triangle that reframes relationships as more egalitarian through processes of inquiry and co-exploration, as well as retrodiction as a research approach as opposed to prediction. And in our paper, we include my narrative trajectory as a teacher adopting this mindset, and sort of you can see the development as I start implementing these ideas in more limited ways, and it expands to a more all-encompassing perspective on my teaching. And we also have examples of how this mindset shift supports specific practices, both in terms of language teaching and in terms of fostering more fruitful collaborations between teachers and researchers. So we see this metanoia as all-encompassing how we approach communication as well as the development of pedagogical practices. So, Elka?
So I just want to start by saying that, as Raya pointed out, one of our main objectives was to encourage and reassure teachers who have a hard time seeing themselves as plurilingual practitioners, either because they object in principle to a priori plurilingual curriculum, or because they're afraid that they don't know the languages of their students. And we make the case that knowledge of the languages of the students is not a sine qua non for a plurilingual classroom, by simply providing a space for plurilingual and cross-cultural explorations. We create opportunities for all class participants, and that includes teachers and students, to enhance their metalinguistic awareness, which deepens, expedites, and facilitates learning. And we have examples for that in the article. And also to better appreciate the beauty of diversity, which among other things fosters empathy and understanding for others. We believe that any element of language and any act of communication can be made object of a fascinating contrastive exploration, from proxemics to haptics, the amount of touching, to intonation contours of sentences and questions. And our experience through the years has shown that such explorations really stimulate intellectual curiosity, much deeper engagement, both cognitive and emotional, and also they lead to greater enrichment for all parties concerned. And also that prevents burnout among teachers. We believe that in a plurilingual classroom, learners are exposed to greater number of affordances. By embracing a plurilingual mindset, classroom participants are encouraged to explore linguistic phenomena in the divergent way. Equally important at the same time, then they're invited to analyze and to study the social situation of language choices. They zoom in on a particular form, and that they have an opportunity to discuss and explore both existing norms and the possibility for and the desirability of norm flouting.
So we've reached the time limit. If you could wrap it up, thank you very much.
So we believe that this is a critical thing, because while many people embrace plurilingual approaches, more and more people at the same time, the gatekeepers are still there, normativity is well and alive. And we think that looking at our semiotic resources through a prism of choice is both empowering and liberating. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much for the talk, Elka and Rhea. And I'd like to thank all the speakers on behalf of the editors and the Plurilingual Lab for this part. And I am grateful to moderate this session.